Brenda, are we ready to get started? I think we've got quite a few participants online and I know everyone's busy.
I think so. That'd be great.
This is our continuing training for city clerks and some for city treasurers. So with the Clerks Association and OMMS, we've been trying to do a number of different topics. Today's is Clerks 101, and I get the easy part. I get to be the moderator who only asks the hard questions and make you give the answers. So I think a good start, and it's really helpful that Brenda was able to get board members to participate. I think that's good for your organization. So why don't we start with maybe just a brief introduction so everyone knows who you are. And Brenda, we'll start with you and tell us a little bit of background.
Thank you, David. My name is Brenda Hall. I am the city clerk for the city of Norman. I also am currently serving as president of OMCTFOA. I've been at the city of Norman for 31 years. Seen a lot of change over the years, so I'm happy to join you all today.
And a couple of follow-ups. Was your original career path to be a city clerk?
Actually, it was not. I was originally going to school to be a CPA, and kind of got derailed from that a little bit, married young, and went back to school later in life and got my degree in public administration. So I was already working here at the time. I've learned a lot over the years. I didn't start out as clerk. I started as the assistant to the clerk and then moved up to deputy. I served there for 9 years, and I've been the clerk for a little over 12 years.
Okay, good. And one of the benefits we have, and it's also one of the challenges, is the diversity in the cities around the state, the different size, the different roles based on what city you may be in. Norman is a city manager form of government, about 110,000 population, so one of the largest cities in the state. Probably the challenges, and we'll talk about some of those for you, are a little bit different than they are in some of the other places, but also some of the issues you deal with are identical to what someone in a small town deals with. So
Absolutely.
In your office, do you have assistants?
I do. I have a deputy city clerk. I do have an administrative assistant, and then I have two other employees that work in my central file area and archiving area. So I have a total of 6, counting myself. We're a small office, but I know we're much larger than many other offices across the state. So I'm happy to have the help I do.
And you report directly to the city manager, or is there someone between you and city manager?
No, I report directly to the city manager. Believe it or not, as large as Norman is, we currently do not have an assistant city manager. So all of the department heads, which I'm one of 13, report directly to the city manager.
And other than those 6 directly in your department, do you supervise, for example, court clerks or animal control or anything else?
Well, this is kind of funny. I do have, I know it's a little bit unusual, but I have facilities maintenance division falls under me, and I supervise a team of 10 over there. Okay.
So a lot of what you also do in day-to-day operations then has to involve personnel, just based on number of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. Good. We also have Cynthia Wayman from McLeod's. Cynthia, if you would give everyone a little bit of background of your career path and what you do in McLeod.
I am Cynthia Wayman. I am the city clerk treasurer at McLeod. I have been with McLeod a little over 2 years. However, I just became city clerk treasurer in, I do believe, July. I do a little bit of everything. I came from a much smaller town where I was there for almost 11 years as the city clerk treasurer. But outside of that,
where was that?
That was in Helena.
Helena. And McLeod is about 3,500 population?
35 to 42.
Okay, and how big was Helena?
450.
Good, good. And some of the same type questions. You're city manager city in McLeod, so you report directly to the city manager?
I do.
And as clerk treasurer in McLeod, I assume you're not elected, you're appointed, hired?
I am appointed.
Because we have a number of elected clerks around the state. And we've talked about in the past that defining those roles for those who are elected, it sometimes gets confusing with some, but you were hired and appointed, and similar to what I asked Brenda, are there others who report to you, or how are you organized?
The utility and billing clerks report to me, which is 2 of them. And then I also have the court that comes underneath me, which is just the court clerk. And then we have a warrant officer.
Okay. And you're also finance director, didn't you say?
Treasurer. Right now a lot. Right now, we have a lady that's still working from home, and eventually, hopefully she'll be able to fill another position when she comes back. And then I maybe won't have as much because right now I'm accounts payable, HR, city clerk, treasurer, all of it right now.
And I would guess for McLeod with 3,500 population to 4,000, you probably have 35 to 50 employees, that range?
Yeah, that's about 35 to 45.
Okay, good. And Camille from Newcastle, glad you're able to join us. How long have you been with Newcastle?
I have been here since August of 2009. So how many years is that? I'm terrible at math. 11 years.
And city clerk the entire time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Had you worked previously as a city clerk before going to Newcastle?
I had. I worked as city clerk for the city of Blanchard for almost 6 years. So I started my clerking career in 2002. I took a little hiatus and went and worked on an oil and gas project. I'm also an attorney, and worked on an oil and gas project in Arkansas for a little bit, and then returned and became city clerk of Newcastle. And my official title is city clerk and attorney for the city manager.
Well, good. That's interesting.
It
is an unusual combination, isn't it?
It's very unique.
And you also are city manager city. I assume you report directly to the city manager.
I do.
And Newcastle's approximately 8,000 population.
We're a little over 10,000 now.
Okay.
Estimated.
10,000.
Yeah.
And I would assume around 100 employees.
Yes.
And how many of those do you get to take care of? Quite a few.
I have a deputy city clerk that also doubles as planning secretary for the planning department. And the utility clerk officially is under me, but she pretty much is able to handle the department out there.
It's always interesting how different cities are organized, because I really believe cities come to be organized the way they are just based on how each individual city evolves over time, not necessarily with a plan of how anyone intended it to be. And so that's just always kind of interesting. What do you, for each of you, and we'll start back with Brenda, if you had to name the one thing you spend most of your time on during the day, what would that be?
Well, unfortunately, right now it's managing council for the most part. We have a very engaged council, probably more so than they should be, to into the weeds a little bit. But I spend a lot of my day putting out fires for them, and the rest of the time I am also working on some policy books for us to adopt internal policies and a council member handbook. I've been working on that quite a bit lately.
And you mentioned managing council. That was actually one of my topics, and I wanted to cover that a little bit, because I think it's common in most cities for the city clerk, even in city manager cities, to be the primary day-to-day contact person for the elected officials. Is that generally true for you, Brenda?
Absolutely. It really is.
And so they expect to be able to contact you and have regular ongoing contact. If they need something, they know you're the one to call. And that seems to be an important role of most city clerks. Is that also true, Cynthia? Would that generally be true with you?
Most of them go through the city manager. I have occasional ones that will come to me.
Okay. And Camille, what about in Newcastle?
Not at all. Not at
Really?
all. In fact, when I first became a city clerk, I was told that I would have no contact with the council. And
That's
so
interesting.
the council contacted the city manager directly. And I kind of brought that training with me to the city of Newcastle. I said, I don't think I should have contact with the council. And it works very smoothly that way. It's very, very nice.
You are very lucky.
Brenda's wishing she could use that line, right?
I'll give Brenda some training. Yeah.
Oh, that would be fabulous. I mean, I don't think it's any big secret of all the things we have going on in Norman right now with our council and initiative petitions and things of that nature. So this year has been anything but normal and pretty much everything horrible.
Well, and Norman has a history of having lots of committees, lots of council, elected official interaction at City Hall on almost a daily basis, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So you're a part of that. Related to that, let's go to another similar topic, and that is, do you participate in executive session? And Brenda, do you?
I normally do not. And I like that because then I can say I'm totally oblivious to what went on in there. However, since we've gone to the Zoom meetings during this whole pandemic, I have participated in a few, not actually participating in the conversation, but have been in the executive session with them.
At least present. And is there a written rule that dictates whether you do or do not?
There is not, actually. Currently, our attorney usually, city attorney attends all the executive sessions, as does the city manager for the most part, unless they are, evaluating him. But there's no written rule.
You may have heard me mention this before, but I once had a city clerk ask if she should go into executive session, and my answer was yes, until you're kicked out. And for about 20 years, she attended all of them because the elected officials didn't know who should or should not be there. So it became the practice that the city clerk was always present because there is no written rule in most places. And that really became the habit there. And to me, it made sense that the city clerk would be present just to help manage what was going on. What about in Newcastle? Do you attend executive session?
Since I have been a clerk since 2002, I have never once attended an executive session.
And is there a written rule that keeps you from it, or is it just the practice and history of how it's done?
It is practice and history. I could be invited, but there's no need. And it would increase. I mean, I've always been taught, and there's probably a rule of law somewhere that if anything is discussed outside of executive session that was discussed in executive session, then it voids any action taken on that matter. And so it's a safeguard. I might flap my mouth about something. So not that I would, but
Interesting. And Cynthia, do you attend the executive sessions?
I attended, I think, 2 in Helena. And then I have not attended any in McLeod yet.
In Helena, was attendance just because that's what they expected and the way that it had always been done? Or
they asked me in on those 2 occasions, but normally I didn't go in.
Okay. It's just interesting. I think it's one of those interesting topics that we really don't cover any place because it's not written down. And again, it's back to every city has evolved a different way. And I would mention, I think some of you have seen the the non-disclosure form we use for executive sessions. If you haven't, it's on the OMMS website. I think that's helped in some places to maintain confidentiality, and really is just a good practice and a good habit. Let's talk about preparing the agenda and what your role may be in that process, because that's another area where there's a lot of diversity in how things are done and who prepares the agenda. And we have a question about executive session. What is it? Okay, well, we have a question of why doesn't the city clerk go in, and a question about minutes of executive session. I think it really is just the habit and practice in different places of whether the clerk does or doesn't. I really am convinced most of the elected officials don't know whether they should or shouldn't, or who should or should not be involved. So it really is answered in each individual city. I think it's a good discussion topic with the city attorney and city manager in the city manager cities, and get a way of doing business that works. Minutes for executive session is probably a long topic, and we have a sample agenda that's on the OMMS website. If you'll look at it, there are some sample minutes for an executive session that are included with it. I think that's a good practice, and it's always an interesting thing. I think the minutes should reflect what was the general topic that was discussed in executive session. And we've got to distinguish between notes of the executive session and minutes of the executive session, because by definition, there will only be minutes if they're officially voted on and approved. And some of you have heard me tell this story. I spent years taking notes in executive session and putting them in a file cabinet and keeping them in a secure place. They are not minutes. No one ever saw them or voted on them. They really were just my notes. So there should not be, unless action is taken when you come out of the executive session, there should not be a discussion about what happened in executive session. And I really believe using the non-disclosure form is a good way to remind everyone that what happens in executive session should stay confidential. Nothing is made public of the executive session unless there's a vote after the executive session. So, Brenda, tell us about the agenda preparation process, and maybe just a good overview of what your process is and how you go through doing it.
Okay. By ordinance, our city manager actually sets the agenda, but the clerk is the one that prepares it. So we have an approval process. We have an automated agenda process where users are able to put their own items into the system, and then it goes through a tracking process to be approved by various people throughout the city, if it's finance or the city attorney or whomever. That my deadline for something like that is 2 weeks prior to the meeting. However, unfortunately, it never fails. I'm getting stuff put in to fast track, the day before we're trying to push an agenda out, and sometimes even day of. It's very difficult to manage that way. When you have an average agenda is about 45 items. Sometimes we have higher than that. We meet twice a month. So the city manager is the final approval on every item that gets placed on the agenda. We do have, and I don't know if everyone does this, but here in Norman, I have an agenda meeting every Tuesday. Our council meets on Tuesdays, and we kind of go over some things that may come up at the meeting that night, get some clarification on some items, and then go over future items for the next meeting. We do that. And the mayor
I'm sorry, who's included in the agenda meeting? Is that with council?
No.
Staff?
No, it's a staff and the mayor. The mayor does attend those, just mostly so that we can make her aware of anything that might come up in the evening based on stuff we received, any comments we received at City Hall about items on the agenda, or things that may be a little more controversial that she needs to be prepared for. But she is the only one. Now, we've had council members ask to attend those meetings. And our city manager has not allowed that, which I think that's appropriate because you have to be able to, I mean, basically you would just be having two council meetings on the same topic. And you have to be able to discuss matters as a staff. You have to vet some items that may not be ready to come forward for a lot of different reasons, political reasons, or just timing. And you have to have the ability to do that internally. It's about we do push our agendas out electronically. I'm sure a lot of communities do that now. But my deputy is the one that works directly with the agenda preparation. She does most of the yeoman's work for that. That's for sure. I couldn't do it without her.
And how do you deal with public requests to be on the agenda? Someone from the general public wants an agenda item.
I do not allow that. I usually, and that happens often because they want to come and speak in miscellaneous comments on our council meetings, and they're told, as it should be, that they could only, direct their comments to council. We can't have a discussion of that because it was an item on the agenda. So naturally, they want to get an item on the agenda. But that's not, we don't do that in Norman. We don't have a written policy necessarily, but I typically tell community members that have requested that items that appear on council's agenda are items of business items that they need to take official action on and approve, such as ordinances and contracts and so forth. And citizens aren't allowed just to place an item on the agenda for purposes of discussion.
I assume you, like most of the larger cities, have a consent agenda also.
We do. We
and
do. Pretty broad in Norman.
Broad, and you can include a lot of items, and I would assume you, along with the city manager, make the decision of what goes on consent versus what goes on a regular agenda item.
Yes, that's correct.
And what would be the normal number of consent items? Is there a limit?
No, we don't have any limit, and it varies obviously based on the size of an agenda and just timing of when things get processed. But we typically have 30 items on consent. That's probably a good average. And then off consent items vary as well, but typically at least 3 or 4, and we can have as many as 10. It just it depends. We do not have, and we used to have years ago, a rule that was adopted by resolution that no more than 4 zoning items could come forward on any council agenda, just because some of those typically draw a lot of discussion and with the public hearings involved. But that was rescinded a few years ago, and it's rare for us to have more than 4 zoning items, but there are occasions when we have 6 or 7 that are up for a public hearing on the same evening. So that gets a little.
In general, what criteria do you use to determine whether something belongs on consent or an action item as a standalone item?
Well, that's a good question. Most of our consent items are just routine items, acceptance and awarding of bids, just routine contract items for construction or services. Obviously, anything that requires a public hearing, like a zoning item, must be off consent. A lot of our grants require public hearings, so they're off consent as well. If we know, or I know, that whatever the item is controversial both in the public and within the council, I typically do not schedule it for a consent item because it won't stay on consent. If that's the case, our council has the ability to remove any item off consent up to the time of the meeting. And honestly, if it's not unanimous, it has to come off consent anyway. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb.
Good. Cynthia and McLeod, in a city of 4,000, what's your role in preparing the agenda?
I do prepare it. The city manager checks over it, and we only go through the mayor pretty much. He tells us what needs to be on it, what doesn't. And then it goes through our attorney, and it's about a week ahead of time.
Okay, and is there any ability for the public just to get something on the agenda? If someone from the public calls you and wants an agenda item, does it show up or not?
If Buck wants it on there, it does. If the city manager don't, then it don't.
Interesting that you.
There is a time in our meetings.
Go ahead.
There is times in our meetings that they can sign up to talk because, you know, we have the public comment or the whatever everyone else wants to call it. But they very rarely do that.
Right. I call it open mic night. You probably have heard
Right.
that. So
Right.
I think that should be left to the local bar myself, but
I would agree. That's exactly what we have in Norman is open mic night. That's for sure. One thing David did, I forgot to mention, which is a little bit unique, especially for Norman. Our council adopted a resolution several years ago that is called the Rule of Three. And they did that because they felt like the city, or some felt like the city manager at the time was controlling the agenda too much, and the mayor. And so they wanted the ability to be able to discuss items or move certain things forward. So if 3 or more council members sign, it just takes 3 to submit a request to have something on the agenda, whether it's an action item or discussion. They can submit that a week in advance to our city manager, and it has to be placed on some form of agenda, whether it's a regular meeting or to one of the committees or something like that.
My experience has been that if a council member wants something on the agenda, it's similar to Cynthia's comment about city manager. If they want it on the agenda, it's going to show up on the agenda. So I think it's interesting that it would take 3 to get something on the agenda. But that is another one of those unwritten rules that's out there that everyone makes it up as they go. It seems to put us in an awkward position to tell an elected official you cannot have something on the agenda. I say that, and I've also seen elected officials put stupid things on the agenda that have no business being on the agenda. And hopefully you have a city manager who can talk to them and convince them it's a bad idea. But generally, go ahead.
I disagree with you at all. We had at the time one council member that was constantly wanting stuff on the agenda, and you know, our city managers over the years that I've worked with have always never necessarily put a policy item forward or anything like that at the request of one council member. You know, if several wanted to discuss it and move forward with it or do some study of it, then certainly it would be something that we would sit in, you know, schedule for a study session or something of that nature. Or unless the council member visited with the mayor and, you know, there was a little bit of consensus about whether or not council should discuss it. That was manipulated over time to where we got this whole Rule of Three. And honestly, to date, I have seen nothing good happen from that. Most of the items that get placed on the agenda under Rule of Three are train wrecks.
Yeah. Camille, how do you do it in Newcastle, and what are your thoughts on first your process, your role in preparing the agenda, but second, this topic of who decides what goes on it?
Well, I would say the city manager and I work together to prepare the agenda. I eventually put something together and he reviews it. And the Rule of Three that Brenda talks about, I knew that Norman had this resolution. I think that's a real good idea to have that resolution, because that was always my understanding when I was taught, and I say when I was taught, or in my early years by our city attorney taught, that either that the agenda item should come from the city manager, the mayor, or 3 councilmen. And so if you have 3 councilmen that are wanting an item on the agenda, you would have to agenda that topic to vote on whether this topic should appear on the agenda for action. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
Anyway, it's kind of cumbersome, but her resolution probably better outlines the procedure for that. And I think that's a real good idea.
Well, in Norman with, I don't remember how many council members you have. Seems like it's 25 or so, but it's really 7 or 9, isn't it?
9.
9.
Council members and the mayor.
3 out of
Right.
9 is probably a little more manageable, but the cities that only have 5, a rule of 3 would
Right.
never work.
Like us, yeah.
Yeah. So, have you
But
had?
one thing I want to add, our council recently has started requesting that I send them a preliminary draft of the agenda 1 week before the council meeting so that they can be better prepared. And I just make sure I mark it as a draft.
Yeah,
So it
that's
doesn't get out
interesting.
there.
And it's interesting, the comment that the mayors review it, have more input than the other elected officials. I know in the cities I work with, they don't. There's been a time in which there would be a review of the agenda immediately before the meeting with the mayor, just to cover any procedural issues or to make sure the mayor's up to speed about what's going to happen. But as far as input into what goes on the agenda, in the cities I've worked with, it's always been equal between mayor and the other elected officials, council members. There's no greater power for one over the other. And so that's kind of interesting. Having a draft a week early for council to review is a little bit unusual, seems unusual, and a lot of extra burden on you, because most of
I
us
had to get
are,
used to it, yeah.
yeah, most of us are last minute trying to get things done anyway, with a deadline and trying to get the agenda finished. For each of you, and maybe start with Cynthia, what deadlines do you, how much in advance do you want agenda items, and how much in advance, what is your goal in getting the agenda posted?
I want the agenda items about a week and a half early. And then it goes to the attorney by that Thursday before. So basically a full week before it goes to the attorney.
Okay.
And then as he gets it back to me either that day or the day after, and then I send out the council packets.
Okay, and post it when you send out the council packets.
Yeah, we do all online now. So we post everything to the website.
Okay, good. Camille, same type process.
Well, since we're having to send the agenda out a week in advance, my deadline, and that would be on a Monday, my deadline, I can take items anytime up until, that Friday afternoon before that Monday. Or
Yeah.
really, I mean, anytime before I send it out.
And Brenda, same type thing. You're probably a little more regimented because of the volume.
Yeah, yes, that would be, I mean, my deadline is 2 weeks prior to the meeting. Very few people actually honor that, but the reason for that is because we go through an electronic approval process by various departments, and each one of those people have at least 24 hours to review and approve that item. So if you have, 5 or 6 different people that has to flow through for approval, it takes a good week or so for it to make it through the system. So, every once in a while, I'll try to get really firm and have no deadline or no, you have to meet the deadline or you can't get on, but it always seems to get fudged a little bit. We recently, I too, like Camille, put out actually a 2-month tentative subject matter for all of their committee meetings and so forth. That kind of happened at the request of one council member. I tried to undo that when they left office, but I was not successful, because that's very difficult to try to look that far in advance and things not change. So your topics change and then everyone gets frustrated and so on and so forth. But our agendas go out on Friday before the meeting on Tuesday. They're always posted no later than Friday. We do not go home Fridays until the agenda is out and posted, both on the website and in the facility as well.
And let's talk about meetings in a little more detail. And first, I know Norman broadcasts their meetings. How many years have you been doing that?
We've been broadcasting through our local Cox channel, which is, the local access channel. We've been doing that since before I came, and that I've been here 31 years. So a long time for that. We started streaming our council meetings through the website in 2009. And then we recently added the YouTube stream about 3 years ago.
And do you retain the recordings of the meetings for forever? Are those archived and forever maintained?
Well, forever might be a long term, but we do archive them, and I have them back from the very beginning of when we first started, especially the ones that are streamed. Now, we don't have the Coxsite meetings archived, but we do have all of our video stream archived and the YouTube feed archived.
For the smaller and mid-sized cities and towns who are debating whether they should broadcast their meetings, what would you recommend to them? Has it been a good thing that you broadcast them?
It's probably been a good thing to allow people to be able to watch without having to come in person. But the one thing I would caution you about, if you do that, and I know we've all had to adapt to this unusual year with COVID, so we've had to maybe allow opportunity for public comment in a different way. And so I feel like it's going to be very difficult to undo some of the things we've done during this time, but nonetheless, I certainly would not take questions through whatever your feed is. Allow them to submit questions and comments to be read into the record. We have done that during this time. It's been very cumbersome, and people tend to send longer comments than they, if it's in writing, probably than they would if they were speaking or could speak in 3 minutes. All of our comments are limited to 3 minutes. So that's one thing I would suggest, that you, as long as you're just putting information out and not using it as a tool for them to interact with you, it's probably okay.
It would be interesting, to me, it'd be interesting for us to know how many cities and towns around the state broadcast their meetings, and in some format, either Facebook Live or YouTube or a dedicated channel. So I know there was a big push to do some of that when the cable providers made public access channels available, and now there's a big push with Facebook Live to be able to broadcast meetings. Obviously, members of the public can show up and record if they want, but it's an interesting question of whether cities should, who are not. In McLeod, do you broadcast a meeting at all?
The only one we did, which I wasn't the city clerk at the time, but it was our first Zoom meeting they did on Facebook Live.
Right.
But
Okay.
outside of that, that was the only Zoom meeting we even did. So the rest has been in person. So we haven't ever done any others.
Yeah, and in Newcastle, do you broadcast your meetings?
We have not, I mean, we started with the Zoom meetings, but prior to that, we did not. But I do think that we may continue to broadcast because it's worked pretty well with Zoom and YouTube. And I think people like that.
I think it's a good benefit for the public, and it allows a lot of the members of the public to see what's going on. I do remember seeing a Norman meeting in which someone showed up at public comments at the end because they made the comment they'd been watching it on TV and decided they needed to come to the meeting and comment. I've always been one who's resisted broadcasting it because I really think it's a business meeting, and public can show up and watch, and that really is the public's role, unless there's a public hearing about a specific agenda item that requires more public involvement. But I think all of you are right. Zoom has kind of changed the way we have to do things, and there's going to be a greater push, I think, for more broadcasting, more Facebook Live, more interaction with the public in that way. I have the same fear I had when this first started. How does it affect the behavior of the council members when the elected officials, when they know they're on TV? And I think for some, it has an impact, and we don't see the same level of good government because of what's being broadcast. Camille, any thoughts on that? Do you have that concern?
You may be right. They perhaps are better behaved if they know they're on camera. But we've
Or
always
worse.
well, we've always recorded our meetings anyway. So there's always been that, extra accountability for what goes on. I don't know that it causes them to be more theatrical or, to please their constituents or whatever, knowing that they're on camera. I haven't seen that.
I think it exactly does that.
I can see that in Norman.
Norman, it becomes, and honestly, I've seen a lot over the years, but I've never seen anything like I've seen the last two from elected officials, and as far as behavior, even with the Zoom meetings, it got to where they were even more relaxed because they were at home. That we had to go through the process of adopting house rules for Zoom meetings, things as normal or as ordinary as would be to most, that you need to come dressed like you would for a meeting in person. You need to remove distractions from the background. You need to not be eating while you're on the meeting, things like that. But we've also had council members eat on a dais here before. So, but I do think the TV adds a level of theater to it. And it certainly does for the citizens that are regulars that use that as their opportunity to get on their soapbox and say their piece.
That's always been my fear, and that it encourages it to become a political event rather than a business meeting. And once it becomes that, it's very hard to encourage good decision making because there's a different factor that comes into it. So that's always been my resistance, and maybe it's showing my age that that's a part of it, because there's a new generation that just expects we broadcast and retain everything forever and make it all available.
I just want to add, I think in our case, we resisted for so long having any kind of video of the council meetings that I think they're afraid now if they dare try to use it for a political platform or theatrics or anything, it'll go away. So they're really, this current council is really behaving well.
Well, good. And the challenge would be the new ones who get elected. Would they buy into that same concept, and would it sustain itself over time? And Norman's a good case study that's very difficult. And I think that's true, not just Norman. I think that's been true in quite a few cities. And if you watch city council meetings from around the country on YouTube, you'll see much of the same behavior. Let me ask a different question, different topic, and let's start with Cynthia. What's the hardest part about the job?
There's so many hard parts. I said there's so many hard parts. Sometimes it's just the time management. Honestly, I think because I always think if I had an hour more in the day, I could do so much more. It is a hard task when you have so much on you to be able to get everything done. Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that your day-to-day work in McLeod is very similar to what Brenda is doing in a city of 110,000? You're really dealing with the same issues. Probably
exactly.
The majority of your agenda items are probably identical.
Probably
the same topics, the same level of expertise needed by the decision makers in McLeod as there is in Norman. And it goes back to the comment I like to tell city councils when we do training: the quality of the elected official has absolutely nothing to do with the number of people who happen to live near them. Same is true with the quality of city clerk work or other city employees. The number of people who happen to live around you doesn't impact how good you are at what you do. So you have the same challenges everyone else does.
Exactly.
Camille, what's the hardest part, or the part of the job that you just say, boy, I dread that part of it?
Well, I like to be able to operate by prioritizing things, but when it comes down to it, everything is important, no matter how small or large it is. It's important to somebody. So getting it all done, like Cynthia says, wishing there were an extra hour in the day. And sometimes things can become pretty hectic, just the phone calls and the people coming in the office. And I have to close my door because I do a lot of research and ordinance drafting, legal type work, contracts, whatever, that I really have to be able to concentrate and focus on. So being able to find that quiet time is the hardest part of my job.
Good. I bet so. That's probably a common theme. Brenda, what's the hardest part about yours other than managing the different personalities of the council members that you've mentioned?
That is one of the most difficult. I would have to agree that just the general politics, but probably, I mean, being in University City, we have this huge diverse opinion of what should happen and what shouldn't happen. So it's very easy for just the slightest things to become political. And that's probably the thing that I dislike the most about being the city clerk. I mean, I love being clerk. I love my job. I love what I do. But that part sometimes kind of sucks the joy out of it for you. But I would agree with Cynthia and Neil that time management is difficult. I mean, like you've said, and they have as well, a clerk wears many hats, and it has many interruptions during the day that they have no control over. And so just being able to actually get your job done and get it done well, we are all pretty much the same. We are all almost type A people that expect perfection. And that's kind of difficult to do when you're just rushing all the time to get through what you need to do.
Yeah, and those are the hard parts about it. Let's talk about some of the good things about it. And Camille, what stands out as just one of the really good accomplishments in your city or someone you've worked with that maybe others haven't seen or don't know about? Because I'm convinced that cities do great work and a very poor job of telling others about that great work. So is there some innovation or something that's been done in Newcastle that you've been a part of that you can say, boy, I wish everybody knew about this because we really did well with this?
Well, when I came to Newcastle, I said Newcastle must be doing something right because there was not all the political discord that I had in my previous city. And I have to say the good things that we do that people may not know about mainly involve large projects for expansion of infrastructure. We have 65 square miles of city limits, which is fairly large. And those types of projects sometimes go unseen by the public. But let me tell you, the developers know about it. The commercial enterprises know about our new huge water lines we're bringing in and everything. And so, and also another thing that the public doesn't know, we resell water to other cities. So we're actually bringing in additional revenues that way. And so these are accomplishments that may not be noticed. If I understand your question accurately.
No, yeah, exactly it. And it really is emphasizes that there's a lot of great work that the public doesn't understand or appreciate much. And from the city standpoint, that we probably don't tell our story as well as we should, do we?
We do not. There's one thing I want to share with you that I learned at another seminar recently, and that is the word banana. Does anybody know what the acronym for banana is? It's build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And so for every good thing we're doing, where we're bringing in all this, water and roads and everything, we do have that counterforce that says, don't build anymore. So
right.
It's the banana people. It's
Yeah.
the monkeys. So,
That's replaced the not in my backyard crowd, hasn't it?
right, right.
Cynthia, what's something good that you've seen in McLeod that the rest of Oklahoma should know about that you really have done well?
Well, I'm not sure if I could say I have, but the city manager did. We are getting a I-40 service road that not very many people know about. I don't even think it's even going to come in effect till 23 maybe, but they're going to be working on it. So it'll be a good thing. It'll be coming from the, my mind just went blank, the Grand Casino all the way to McLeod Road. We'll have a service road. So it'll be nice. But our city manager worked on it for years.
It's amazing. Some of those type projects will have an impact on the community for decades.
It will.
The public probably doesn't know what goes into making it happen. I recently had a good discussion about an annexation issue that had happened 40 years ago with a mayor who was involved in the annexation. At the time, it was farmland that meant nothing, and 40 years later, it's worth a fortune to that city.
Right.
And it's
Yeah,
just some of those things.
Right. Yeah, this will allow us to put in more businesses, which will bring more revenue. So it'll be a good thing.
Yeah. Brenda, some good work in Norman.
Well, we have some great city employees that are very innovative, and as you said, mostly people just focus on the negative things or create negative stories. But we actually have at our water reclamation facility, our employees have put in a system that they did all this on their own, where we're now producing all of our own power down there. Kind of cut through with some leading edge equipment and things of that nature, and that they did through pilot studies on their own. So they have done some great things down there. And then we are currently, now some people will say this is not a good thing, it's kind of ick, but we all need water, and it is a very valuable resource to every community. And Norman is leading the charge on potable reuse. And is currently working with the EQ to try to get some regulations in place, but we would be able to do that. It would come from our water reclamation facility into some filtering system, just natural filtering system into Lake Thunderbird, and allow us to be able to pull more out of our own water. So it's kind of new and innovative for Oklahoma. But it's also something that a lot of citizens get really nervous about when you talk about drinking your own wastewater.
Yeah, there are very few cities who have done that and pulled it off well, and have been willing to try that. We only have a few minutes left, and I think it's important that we talk maybe in closing a topic that maybe benefits those who are new clerks, because one of the problems I've seen with the city clerk profession, it's good that all of you have good tenures and lots of experience, but we have way too much turnover. And I would bet that some of our participants who are watching are new and young in the profession. So maybe we close with this question and start with Cynthia. What advice do you give the new young clerk who's just starting in this profession to be more successful in what they do?
Do not be afraid to ask questions. There are so many clerks out there that will help you answer those questions. And it is so much easier to ask than it is to search for 5 hours or 10 hours, when you can get it a heck of a lot quicker and be a lot easier and better for you.
The phones still work, and every answer is not online, as it helps to call someone.
It does.
Good advice. Camille, what are your thoughts?
I think it's really important to do your best to remain neutral in all issues. It's hard. You have to bite your tongue, but you just grit your teeth and you say, "You jerk," under your teeth, and that was a quote from a former mayor that I had. She said, grit your teeth and just say you jerk. So, but that would be my best advice, is to remain neutral. And I also mentioned earlier that I do not have contact with the city council except for, niceties and pleasantries, and all city council contact is through the city manager. And I think that is a really, really good practice.
Interesting. Yes. Brenda, what advice do you have for the new city clerks?
My advice would be to not get overwhelmed. It is a lot of information to learn, especially when you're a new clerk. And all I can say is network, network, network. That's what this organization is here for, OMCTFOA, is to help you walk through the process. There is someone, regardless of the size of your community, there's a counterpart somewhere that has been doing it long enough to help you. And I would say get plugged in with our organization for sure, so that you can get the proper training that you need. Secondly, I would say OML puts out a good handbook for clerks and treasurers that have all of the go-to things that are really important about open meetings, open records, record retention, budgeting, all of the things that are really important to your job. And you don't know what you don't know, but sometimes what you don't know can get you into a lot of trouble if you haven't done it correctly. So I would just really, really encourage everybody to get plugged into the organization and use other clerks around the state to help you through your problems.
Yeah, all great advice. And I think my only thought would be that every mistake that you're going to make, someone else has already made. So there aren't many that we can't recover from, and we're all going to make mistakes in some way. I've dealt with some of those where someone maybe forgot to post the agenda, and the remedy is we're going home early. We're not having a meeting because but worse things have happened, and we adjust to those, and shouldn't be afraid to deal with it when it happens and go on. I love the comment about everyone helping everyone else and the networking. As most of you have heard me say, we do a horrible job of helping each other and sharing what we do well, and some of that is the communication amongst cities has not been as good as it should be, and we've got to get better. Your organization does a great job of that with the clerks. So I think we're out of time, or very near out of time. Do we have any other questions that came up that we need to deal with? Nope. And we've had good participation, and Brenda, any as president, any closing comments for everyone? And if after that, we'll conclude.
Okay, thank you, David. One thing I would like to say is we are so appreciative as an organization of Oklahoma Municipal Management Services offering to hold these sessions for us. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get all the training you can get and all that's available to you. And obviously these sessions cost nothing. And I am forever grateful for that. I encourage you to attend as many as you can, and we hope to continue this relationship for long into the future.
Well beyond COVID, this should be a way of doing things into the future, because the state's too big. As someone who's been to a couple of hundred cities around the state for meetings, it's too big to keep doing that. We need to do it this way as much as we can. So I appreciate all of you participating, and thanks for the great input for everyone.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.